May it be the Princess of the Universe. Hi folks, I'm Matt, and Bruce forgot to show up to record tonight. So once again, last minute, I gotta do this on my own. But that's okay, because I had an idea. We didn't have much to talk about. We were just gonna talk about nerd news, basically do one of our nerd news updates, and I'll save all the discussion points for another week. We can always kick that episode down another week. No rush on that one. That news is always gonna stay there. So, what I wanted to talk about was one, I had an idea a long time ago, folks. As you know, the new Dune movie was supposed to come out this year, and I was going to read through all the Dune books in anticipation for it. And I remember I was thinking about doing Dune book reviews very similar to the Highlander book reviews that I did earlier. But I realized those reviews would take me all the way till maybe March or next April to finish because there's just so many books to review. And then I thought, well, you know what? Maybe I should just dedicate an episode just to kind of giving an overall, review of the Doom books, as a group, as a whole, very vague overview. Maybe that will be good enough. But then, of course, Bruce was getting antsy because I'd done too many Highlander books and that we had so many other things to cover that I said, okay, I'll just put that idea on the shelf and I probably won't get around to it. Maybe next year when we have some dead time and he can't record, I'll put that one up there. Well, I had to take it off the shelf immediately. Didn't even have to gather dust. Just a few weeks later, here I am back with this original idea of kind of giving you basically an overall review of all the Doom books. As you know, I read through them all again this year. There is a new one that's out. It's about the Duke, and I think it leads up to the events of Dune, the movie, I believe, or the first novel. I'm not really sure yet, but I haven't read it. I'm gonna wait until all three of them come out, and that's gonna be, I guess, 3 years from now or 2 years from now. This is a practice I have started a long time ago, back when I was reading Star Wars novels. Actually, my first trilogy was the Timothy Zahn trilogy, and I read that first one in just a matter of days. It was in paperback, and then waited forever for the next one to be in paperback because I didn't want to pay the $23 for a hardback. I was like, no way am I paying that much. And I said, I'll just wait on it. Well, it felt like forever until that thing came out in paperback. And then I read that in a few days. And by then, the third hardback was out. And I was like, screw it. I'll just buy them all. And I bought them all in hardback. And I said, I will never wait for another trilogy again. And after that, even Star Wars, which, as you know, folks, I love my expanded universe. I absolutely love my expanded universe. But I will wait until a trilogy. And I did this back when, Star Wars was coming out, when the Bantam novels were coming out. I would not read a trilogy until it was finished. Now, the internet wasn't that big a deal back then, boys and girls, so getting spoiled on what was going on in the books, there was hardly any chance. I would have to go out of my way to get spoilers for these books. And thank goodness that there was not that many other people that I knew in my area who were reading the Star Wars novels. So there was no one who could spoil them for me either. So it was an easy thing to do. And now it's still kind of easy as long as I don't do a Google search on it. And novels, people review movies and TV shows. That's the thing you can get spoilers on, right? Because there's news about it. If a new book comes out in a series, you're going to have to do a specific internet search to get spoiled on that. Okay, I'm sorry. It's just the truth. Um, you're not going to get spoiled on a book review, most likely. I mean, if Harry Potter were to come out with a new book, maybe you'd get spoilers because that's a pretty big deal. But with the Star Wars novels, I never got spoilers. And with the Doom books, unless I specifically look for something, like I said, I will not be spoiled. So I can still, to this day, just kind of sit out and wait on it. And then when it finishes, when the trilogy finishes coming out, then I'll read them all. And I'll read them back to back to back. No hesitation at all. I'll be chomping at the bit by the time the third one's in. In fact, if the third one has a release date and it's a few weeks before the release date, I might go ahead and start on book one, or maybe a week before, since I can probably finish this pretty quick. That way I don't have to wait. But I hate waiting on a trilogy. So I mean, if reading book one, and then you have to wait a year at least, maybe even more, and by then you may just forget what happened in the first one, and you'll have to catch up again. I don't want to do that. So for me, it's just better just to wait until they're all out and read them all together. Anyway, so I won't be reviewing that one, the newest one that came out. I believe it was in October. I will be doing like a short, brief overview of all the other books that I read and what I thought about them. Now, this is my second time through the series. My second time through the series, and it's great. It's great, absolutely wonderful. As you know, Frank Herbert, legendary Frank Herbert, wrote the original novels, Dune, Dune Messiah, oh gosh, Children of Dune, and then it goes from God Emperor Dune to Heretics of Dune to Chapter House Dune, and then he passed away. Well, decades later, his son and my favorite author, Kevin J. Anderson, who I guess befriended his son, would later on pick up the world of Dune and continue writing in it. And of course, that's a little bit of what got me into it. Plus, I'd heard Dune was just classic, science fiction. I should try it out. And I can't remember, it was probably a combination of those two things that got me into Dune. Because everyone says, "Oh, you've got to read Dune." I think I'd watched the movie and was a little confused by it, but I heard the book was really good. So I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll try it out." And this is back when Science Fiction Book Club was just, blowing up back then, and they were reprinting all the Dune books. But a lot of the ones I got are first editions of God Emperor of Dune and Heretics and Chapter House Dune, because back then no one was really collecting those. Dune book those books weren't really, this is like the mid 90s, and no one was really interested in getting those, and eBay wasn't a big deal back then, so you could still find these for pretty cheap. So a lot of the books, even the science fiction book club editions I have, are worth a couple of $100. I mean, the whole collection's probably in the ballpark, not exactly, but getting close to the $1,000 value, I would say, because a lot of them carry a couple $100 each, so they'd probably be $1,000 there on my shelf. Just looking at the whole Dune collection right now. It's not about the value; I wouldn't sell it anyway. But I just absolutely love this story. Dune is really good. Not as good as Star Wars. And then continuity. Well, I'll tell you what I think about its continuity going forward. But first, let me just go ahead. I think I've done enough introduction here. I've seen the movie, the science fiction movies. I thought they were okay. I actually really liked the I think it's David Finch movie from the 80s. I actually absolutely love that. I think visually it gets Frank Herbert's vision better than the science fiction sci-fi channels movie renditions. I think they did that in Children of Dune. If I can't remember. It's been so long since I've seen those. But and I still need to watch that whole Dune movie. I keep forgetting to do that. But I want to watch it again just to kind of see some of those visual imageries that Finch put in his movie that I thought were really good and portrayed, the people and characters in the world that was written in the book very well. Let's go through these, and of course, I am going through them in in chronological order. And this is not as best I know how. This is actually chronological order. There's not that many books in the series. If you want to get the expanded universe of Dune, yeah, it's going to cost you a little bit, unless you get paperbacks. If you get paperbacks a lot, you can get the whole thing for pretty cheap. And I'll give you my total review of what I think about it later on. But let's get into the first ones. Chronologically speaking, I don't remember what this trilogy was called. I just call it the Butlerian Jihad trilogy because the three books are Butlerian Jihad, Machine Crusade, and Battle of Corin. Now, this takes place at the earliest point in our story. Right now, machines, the bad guys, the reason there are no machines in the future, this is why there's a war going on. Ominous basically controls everything. He's slowly trying to advance into the human worlds, but the human worlds are protected by those shields that you see in the very first book. The Holtzman shields are fending off the droids. They don't know how to get around those, and that's the big uh, thing that's blocking their path of domination. And they're trying to figure out, how do we get around this and how do we conquer those worlds? And they're trying different strategies, different things to kind of get in, and nothing's working right now. So the battle's kind of at a stalemate. Ominous, the droids control so many. Ominous is this all-knowing, almighty AI being that was accidentally created by the humans and kind of unleashed by the Titans. Titans are robots with human brains, and they were warlords back in their day, but then they got into these big battle mech droids, and that's how they live on forever. But one of them accidentally let Ominous kind of take over everything, and they were supposed to be the rulers of the world, but it turned out to be Ominous instead, which to the Titans' disdain is who they have to report under. And so he's the big baddie here, but to be honest, as ominous is the, I guess central, he's supposed to be the ultra overlord villain of them all. He's the one that's least interesting, and they really don't go into him. I think Kevin J. Anderson and Brian Herbert just wanted someone like, the Emperor, but not to make him cool, just like, yeah, he's the leader of everything. He's the overlord, he's over everything, but he's not interesting to talk about. He's just a computer. So let's talk about the other people with feelings. And that's really cool. I thought that was really interesting. Um, this talks about Serena Butler, of course, and how her child dies and how that starts the jihad that leads to the human uprising on different planets. One planet is captured at the very beginning of the book, just about. They have a way to trick and get through the shields. It only works once, but yet one of their long-term planets has finally fallen and they're all upset. Well, then they try to mount a rescue mission to free it, liberate it, and they do. And then they get kind of like, yeah, I think we can take this fight to the machines. Let's just start fighting them instead of, being on defense defending our homes. Let's go out and get on the offensive there. And it's a pretty good story. It talks about how you have the first mention of a Harkonnen. I think it's Absolard, but he is a good guy. The Harkonnens were good. They were honorable back then. They weren't cheaters and thieves and liars and despicable people. They were honorable people back then. And then you have Atreides, who is kind of the villain because the lineage of Atreides goes back to the warlord days. And the first ever common day, as we see it, Atreides, fell from the cloning, not cloning, but the preserved sperm, I guess you could say, of one of the warlords. And he's trying to just grow his own heir, but every time he gets disappointed with them and kills them. Well, now he finally finds one that he thinks will be good. And of course, he thinks that, this first Atreides we learn of thinks that his father is sinless and the humans are terrible people because he's been kind of brainwashed that way. Serena Butler is the catalyst in this trilogy because, of course, Harkonnen falls in love with her. Atreides also falls in love with her, but is intrigued by her. He's never seen anyone like her. She challenges his thoughts, and makes him kind of rethink and kind of open his eyes and do some study, do some homework on what's really going on in the galaxy. And then there is this droid called Erasmus, and he is one of the finest characters that Kevin J. Anderson ever brought into the Dune series. Erasmus is a droid he's kind of trying to become human. He's on a quest to become human. He doesn't know what it's like to be human, but he's trying his hardest. It's your classic Star Trek tale, right? You've seen it with Spock, you saw it with Commander Data, I mean, and then you saw it with the hologram. It's the whole classic story of someone trying to become human, or knowing what is humanity? How can I be more human? And with to be honest with Erasmus, that's basically what the character is all about. He's just trying to learn to be human, but he has no idea. He has no idea. He's the evil version of all those Star Trek characters I mentioned because he does horrific projects just to kind of see what humans act like and how they react to things. Well, he's intrigued by Serena because she doesn't cower before him. She fights, and he kind of likes that, and he keeps her around. And she's already pregnant with Harkonnen's child, and he decides to let her keep it to kind of study what she's like. But after a while, he gets jealous because Serena's giving that baby more attention than he is. So, in a fit of selfishness, which is kind of human, he decides to take the baby and kill it. And yes, the baby dies. And this kind of spoilers, I guess. But it dies like brutally. These are some of the most violent novels you will read. I mean, he takes the child, and I'm going to do a little spoiler here, so skip ahead, I guess, a minute or skip 5 just to be sure. He throws the kid. Here we go. Spoilers. Spoilers for 1 minute. I'll do 1 minute, so 60 seconds and go. So he throws the kid over a balcony and he goes kersplat on the cement. I know that's kind of callous of me to say it just like that, but that's exactly what happens. And that horrifying vision just enrages the humans who have, grown fond of Serena as well, because she's trying to, do what's best for them. She's trying to give them extra benefits and stuff under the rule of Erasmus. And so they all rise up and they just take down everything. And Erasmus has to leave because he loses the entire planet because of this. And this is what sparks the jihad. And it's also a cool story because he's kind of keeping that secret away from Ominous. Since Ominous never got an update, he didn't want to tell him because he's like, oh, I'll get in trouble. So again, Erasmus is displaying human emotion. He just doesn't realize it. Um, all of these characters are really awesome. I don't want to ruin the story. I think I'm ruining too much of the story now. So I'm gonna steer away from too many spoilers, I think. But the whole story as a whole is really good, and that's the first trilogy you read. If you're reading in chronological order, which I do think you should. I really do think you should. I'll explain why in a minute. The next one is the Schools of Dune. As you know, there's the Bene Gesserit. They're the Sisterhood. They're kind of the witches. You got the Mentats, who are basically the human version of a computer. Their brains are wired to think really smart and make calculations, and they're like Vulcans in a way. And then you got Navigators, who basically are these beings that float around in spice gas who can get you from one point to the other. And that's what the three books are called: The Sisterhood of Dune, Mentats of Dune, and Navigators of Dune. Basically, it picks up at the end of the last trilogy, and now Gilbertus Albanus, or whatever his name is, the first ever Mentat, actually turned out to be someone who we had seen in the first trilogy. He was being trained by Erasmus to be a human computer. And so we find the origin of what the Mentats were in this one. And Gilbertus is a great character. I mean, really awesome character, a lot of depth into him. He has kept the last nodule. It's like just a little device that holds Erasmus. Erasmus can't move. His just memory core is just in one little box with a speaker, and that's all he's limited to. And knows he's smart. He's like, hey, if I unleash you, Father, he calls him Father because he raised him. And by the way, there's some, oh, what's it called? Longevity gene experiment that only the machines knew, and they drilled it into the Atreides, the first Atreides, who, by the way, is in just about all of the prequel novels, which is kind of nice. Kind of nice to have someone you can relate to, because after being gone for so many years, the Harkonnens have had. We find out why the Harkonnens and the Atreides have this rivalry and everything, and we see it gets a little bit darker here because the Harkonnens aren't as good as some of them are, but some of them aren't anymore, and they hate the Atreides line. Some of the newer kids do, and they try to kill the last, or the wouldn't say the last of the Atreides line, but they kill some Atreides, and they start this big war that starts off between these two houses. And there's a lot of interesting stuff that goes on here. Basically, the Emperor Chrono, he has a great storyline. He and his brother are in this, and they are just great. Roderick and oh gosh, I can't think of the other guy's name, but right now, but they're both excellent characters. They have a little sister called Anna, who's kind of just a teenage rebellious girl who's kind of ditzy and just kind of acting like a teenager. And she goes through the ringer, man. First off, they take her to the Bene Gesserit to learn discipline, but then by some accident, she takes this poison that kind of turns her kind of insane. And so then they're trying to get her brain back together. So they take her to the Mentats, but then they find out that, Gilbertus has been working with Erasmus for years. And, even though he didn't really mess with her, he's trying to help her, she's now some kind of Bene Gesserit Mentat hybrid, and so, but her mind isn't all there anymore. And she's trying to become more, human again herself. Um, this kind of ends Erasmus's storyline. Just to kind of make a long story short, he gets his body back, then gets to go into a human body with a computer brain, and starts feeling emotions, or at least you can feel, touch, taste, and eat. And so he's kind of going through all these emotions here. Now, again, I don't want to spoil too much, so I'm gonna I'm going to say skip another minute for spoilers here. So 1 minute, go. 60 seconds. Here we go. So it talks about how Erasmus dies, and it's really interesting. He and Anna kind of quote unquote fall in love. He just uses it as an experiment. She thinks she's really in love with him, but then later on, he decides he's not in love with her. She's just an experiment. She's kind of exhausting because she always wants to be loved by Erasmus. So Erasmus kind of tells her off, and then she goes away. Well, then he finds his heart is hurting. He doesn't know what's wrong. He can't eat. He can't concentrate. What is going on? And he realizes, oh, that feeling is love, and he actually does love Anna because these two have grown together over this trilogy in so many ways. So he actually, as Anna goes off into the deadly planet of poison to kill herself, Erasmus joins her, tries to take her back, but decides he's eroding from the inside out too, and so they both die. And that's a great ending, hand in hand. And it's a great ending to the story. In fact, this whole story, The Schools of Dune, is another great trilogy that you should check out. Now, after that is the House trilogy. House Atreides, House Harkonnen, and House Corona are the three books. This is basically focusing on young Leto Atreides, as he's rising. Him and his father, and then after his father passes away, as he kind of takes the reins and goes from there and kind of grows. It has some kind of side story too with another house that you never hear of before, which kind of bothered me. But this was the first prequel series that Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson ever did. So they didn't really have their footing down on what all they wanted to do yet. This does focus on a young Duncan, Idaho. We finally hear about him. He kind of grows up into a young man to be the swordsman of Ghent or whatever they are. He becomes a sword master in this one, and you get to hear about him. This is the only book, though, where there are several contradictions. The contradictions are in the quotes at the beginning of the book. The reason I say they're contradictions is because when they're giving historical accounts of past characters or quotes from them, they don't match up to what actually happened to their character or what went on, with their, with how their character arcs were when the other prequels, the ones I just mentioned, came out. I mean, like one they said, "Oh, so and so died an old, he died very young," is what this quote says. Well, no, because in the books later on, they decide that he died when he was an older man. You're like, wait, 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 how can that be? Or, oh, she was queen of she started the sisterhood of the Bene Gesserit, and she died in a fire. No, she didn't die in a fire. That's the prequel books. You killed her off in a different way. Now, all of these could be chalked up to misinterpretations or just false history quotes. So like I said, it's just the quotes where you have a lot of contradictions, and it's obvious that Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson just didn't have all their ducks in a row and decided to change some things when they decided to go back and write these prequels. But the House trilogy is good. It is the weakest of all the Kevin J. Anderson, Brian Herbert collaborations, and for good reason too. It's one of their first tries at it. After that, I would say take a break, read Road to Dune. Road to Dune is basically a behind the scenes. It was supposed to be the Silmarillion version for that Tolkien had. Not Silmarillion, but yeah, kind of Silmarillion. It goes into the mind of Frank Herbert and his ideas for Dune, his early writings of it and everything. I think there's one short story. There's a few short stories. They would reprint these later, but there's a few short stories collected that Frank Herbert wrote too, which are all right. They're not that good, but they're okay. Definitely a Dune fan should probably get it out. It's worth reading once. The second time, I only read the short stories. I did not read the behind the scenes because I'd already read that before, and I didn't really want to read any more about that. But Road to Dune is an interesting read, and I think that's the one of the cheapest ones to get secondhand. There is another one called Tales of Dune. I would kind of say that toward the end because it has tales from the early, but it's from Kevin J. Anderson, Brian Herbert, and they just reprinted some of Frank Herbert's tales as well. Just not all of them, but a few of them. And it kind of tells stories from the Bethlehem Jihad to all the way up to the newest books, the books that end the series or right before they were ending the series. So I'd kind of maybe save that one before you get to like Sandworms of Dune or something. But anyway, uh, that's Road to Dune. Now, Tales of Dune were actually ebooks and short stories that were doled out, not randomly, given out during ebooks, and just every once in a while when their books were coming out, they do an ebook. Well, they decided to collect all these into a hardback novel, and it was done through Wordfire Press, which is Kevin J. Anderson's printing company. So I was really excited about that, and I got it. That was one of the most expensive books because I guess he had to charge a lot for it because he was self-printing it. But I do like having everything in print. Now, before that, I did order the ebooks online. I did read them. I remember, even going to work out and reading the ebooks from Dune. That's the only time that I would buy the ebooks if they weren't going to come out in print. But later on, they did, and I was very happy, and I have it in my collection. And it's a nice thing to have. I don't know why. There's like one or two stories from Road to Dune that they just didn't include in there. If they would have, then Road to Dune would have been not important at all to have, and at all. You could have just bought Tales of Dune and kept them all. So I don't know why they didn't put in those last. I believe it was just two tales from Frank Herbert, maybe even just one. Maybe it's one or two that just weren't included in the Tales of Dune. You're thinking, well, why not? Why not put some extra? It's just a couple extra pages. Surely that wouldn't have broke them, right? So I never understood that, but oh well, it is what it is. So moving on to the big one here. Big one is Dune, written by Frank Herbert. And you know what? Now that I'm reading it, as I'm older now, and I've gotten to appreciate books more, I reread Dune, and it's not that good. It's overrated. I hate to say that. I'm going to anger a lot of people by saying that, but I do believe it is overrated. It's an overrated novel, and I'll tell you why. It's overrated because Frank Herbert does a lot of, I can't remember what it's actually called, but commentary at the beginning where he's trying to explain to you what's going on in the world. How does he do that? He does that through Paul Atreides getting lessons, school lessons about what the world's like, and at the same time, you have the Baron Harkonnen bringing his nephew in and telling him what it's like in the Senate right now, what it's like in the political world right now, and you're like, wait, what? And it's all this setup basically to kind of describe to you, man, the word is on the tip of my tongue. I've said this a million times whenever I talk about these Doom books, and I can't remember what the actual word is called. But anyway, someone in the comments is going to let me know a billion times. Too bad. I already knew by then. Actually, once I finish this podcast, I will know the word. But all of this setup, all this explaining how the world works, that goes on for literally half the book, it feels like, where they're just setting up just one discussion and talk after the next to kind of, let you know what their world is like and how you get a better understanding. And man, maybe that's the only way he could do it, but it's been done a lot better by a lot other authors since then. And that to me just felt to kind of drag on a little bit too much there as we're just kind of setting up one, thing after the other. And in the end, I mean, it kind of ends all of a sudden. I mean, yeah, everyone I think should know the Dune story. Paul Atreides gets, his dad dies. They all get assassinated except for him and his mom. They go out into the desert. They find the Freeman, which the origin of the Freeman was described in the prequel books too, which was really interesting, but won't get too much into that. And then, of course, Paul Atreides comes back as the chosen one, the Herix Curix, or I can't remember. I don't even know how you pronounce it, to be honest. I don't remember the movie right now. But he is the chosen one, and the Bene Gesserit's breeding program has been thrown off, and they kind of knew it might had, but now he rules the galaxy because he controls the spice, he controls the worms, he is the worm rider. He walks without rhythm, so he won't attract the worm. That's the best quote from Dune. Um, Dune has a lot of stuff going for it. I'll be honest. Dune is really unique. It's really intriguing at times, especially when Paul and his mother are out there in the desert on their own and everyone else has died. You kind of feel sorry for him. You're following his travels. His redemption just comes like, at the very end. The book kind of ends unceremoniously. It looks like, I think, the last two chapters or something. You're like, whoa, it's over? I mean, just kind of ended real quick. The Harkonnens are defeated, for good. Baron Harkonnen's killed off. His nephew dies at the hands of Paul in a duel, and the world is saved. Now he controls the spice. He will control the galaxy, and things will be better. Of course, when it's a best-selling novel, things are not going to be better. They're going to be worse, and that means Frank Herbert can write more books on Dune. But you know what? What I'm going to do, I've decided to make this a two-part series because I don't know if Bruce will be here even next week. And I've still got more to talk about. I haven't talked about half of the books I wanted to, and my time, I'm trying to keep these around 30 minutes these days. My time is basically up. So I'll just go over the second half in part two of my Dune Books review. So until next time, we'll see you later with another Princes of the Universe.